Hello and welcome to Voices of Agriculture. I'm your host, Reggie Hall. Coming up on this South Carolina Farm Bureau installment, we're going to talk about life's certainties, death, and taxes. Specifically, the federal estate tax, or what many refer to as the death tax. They waited until the final hour and then some, but Congress finally addressed the estate tax issue in its dawn of the new year efforts to keep us from falling off the fiscal cliff, when it passed the American Taxpayer Relief Act of 2012. But was it enough to help family farmers? What changes did Congress make to keep the issue from affecting farmers into the future? We'll address those questions and more in the next half hour when we hear from South Carolina Farm Bureau President David Winkles, who's also on the American Farm Bureau Federation Board of Directors. We'll hear from Bob Stallman, President of the American Farm Bureau Federation. A South Carolina farm father and son will talk about how the estate tax affects their ability to pass down the family farm to future generations. And we'll talk with an estate planner about the huge challenge of helping family farmers plan for the future. Stay tuned as South Carolina's installment of Farm Bureau's Voices of Agriculture continues.
You know, there are many events in which a person can and arguably should be taxed in life. You know, every time we spend money, we pay sales tax. When we purchase something and sell it at a higher price, we pay a capital gains tax. We pay taxes on any income that we make, and we pay Social Security and Medicare taxes to fund entitlement programs. So the argument is, if we are taxed at every time it seems that we spend, make, or save money, why should we be taxed simply because we have died? You know, at that point, we are making the chances for our children to come back to the farm less certain. Because when they have to sell a big portion of the farm just to simply pay the inheritance tax, it makes young people less attracted to return back to the farm.
That was Glenn Cope, the immediate past chair of the American Farm Bureau's Young Farmers and Ranchers Committee. He was speaking at a time when it looked like Congress was going to ignore the cries of farmers across the country and not repeal the federal estate tax. Hello and welcome back to South Carolina's installment of Farm Bureau's Voices of Agriculture. I'm your host, Reggie Hall. Our topic today is one of American Farm Bureau's priority policies, the federal estate tax, the tax that would have caused more than 500,000 farms across the country to fall into a fiscal chasm at the time of the owner's death had Congress not addressed the issue in the final days of its last session. Here with us today is the president of the South Carolina Farm Bureau Federation, David Winkles. He's also on the American Farm Bureau Board of Directors and a South Carolina farmer. Congress avoided, or some say delayed, the fiscal cliff in the dawn of the new year and successfully addressed an issue that could have affected as many as 500,000 or more U.S. farmers and ranchers. Let's begin by explaining what's at the very heart of the estate tax issue and what's at stake for American farmers and ranchers with this issue.
You've got a high capital base. In many cases, $1 million would have only been on average about 177 acres of farmland.
Wow.
So that's a huge change in passing property along or passing business along.
You look at capital intensity of farms. A combine, I understand, a new one, $250,000 or more. A cotton picker, the same type of thing.
Well, actually, a new cotton picker is close to $700,000.
Oh,
and combines are closer to $500,000.
Wow.
So as you can see, the equipment alone, not considering the land,
Right.
is a huge capital investment. It does not take a very large farm at all. And that's at the heart of the question too, is, you know, the average size of farms today, you know, what's a good economic unit, what's reasonable to pass along to another generation, you know, how many children can you continue to keep interested in a farm, you know, especially if they have to rebuy it once you pass away.
Well, and that's another point. This really doesn't affect today's farm owner. It affects the family he leaves behind. at the time of his death.
That's exactly right. It's like life insurance. A person doesn't buy life insurance for themselves, they buy it for their heirs.
Right.
Inheritance tax is the same issue. It doesn't affect the individual, it affects their family after they pass away. Whenever you're dealing with the loss of a loved one, on top of that, within 9 months, you've got to start figuring out how you're going to maintain the business that you get to derive your income from.
And with farming, that means usually selling off land or equipment or something else.
Absolutely. At the old 55% rate, it was much more likely you would have to sell off assets.
Wow.
The 40% rate is better, but we in Farm Bureau would prefer to see this as zero.
Right. Despite the severe drought west of here, out west and in the Midwest, news reports tell us that in 2012, it was a terrific year for farmers across the country. Commodity prices, some were at historic all-time highs. If farmers did that well, according to news media and what the general public believe, then what makes this issue so stressful for farmers?
Well, it makes it even more important because as the drought has happened, you have found that farmland prices are at a point much higher than they've been in a number of years. So therefore it makes it even more important from an estate's tax standpoint. Again, agriculture is very capital intensive, and the land being one of those biggest cash items of the mix of resources necessary to produce a crop. So I'm told farmland values in the Midwest are some of the highest that they've ever been.
Wow. So smaller farms will reach that threshold a lot quicker nowadays.
That's right. That $5 million exemption will come about a lot quicker than it would have 20 years ago.
Wow. We'll continue our conversation about the federal estate tax issue and its effect on farmers and ranchers across the country when Farm Bureau's Voices of Agriculture continues. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to South Carolina's installment of Farm Bureau's Voices of Agriculture. I'm your host, Reggie Hall. We're talking today about the recent changes in the federal estate tax that were incorporated into the American Taxpayer Relief Act of 2012, the fiscal cliff remedy. Repeal of the estate tax is one of Farm Bureau's priority policies. Here's American Farm Bureau President Bob Stallman.
For more than 4 decades, Farm Bureau has been at the forefront of seeking death tax reform. Between 2002 and 2012, the exemption and tax rate have changed 9 times. A higher death tax exemption level and a lower rate need to be put in place now. Farmers and ranchers need the certainty of a low rate and high exemption on death taxes to protect family farms. That is the only way we can effectively prepare for the future and pass along our farms and ranches from one generation to the next. AFBF will focus its grassroots resources and encourage farmers and ranchers to take action and protect farms and ranches from damaging tax increases.
That was Bob Stallman, President of the American Farm Bureau Federation. Mr. Winkle's not a moment too soon. It looks like Farm Bureau won another victory in Congress in the final moments, sort of like the Carolina bowl game and the Clemson bowl game. They waited till the final seconds to pull it off and to win the victory. How big a deal is it with the increase in the estate tax rate in this new law that increases from 35% to 40% in that tax rate?
Through a lot of discussions over time, even though we would have much preferred to have a 0% rate and a zero exemption, just no estate taxes at all, we've settled on over time that a $5 million exemption and a 35% rate was something that was at least livable. The 40% rate, yeah, that's a little bit higher, but it's a whole lot better than the 55% rate.
Yeah,
a whole lot better.
And I understand the $5 million exemption rate is actually a little over $5 million, and there's an inflation factor built into that too, so that will help some.
That's a key point for an inflation factor to be built into it so that you don't have a double whammy. of increased values and the amount of exemption staying frozen at one point.
We often talk about the volatility of the business of farming when we talk about world market prices, the tough international trade regulations, the weather, of course, is unpredictable, domestic regulations, many of those based on emotions and not on science. Given that volatility, how important is it that we now have a permanent federal estate tax law?
Well, I think the key issue there is planning, being able to plan. You know, I think back to the 1970s, I wouldn't have been able to farm at all had my dad not done a great estate tax plan back in 1970 and 71 as I was leaving Clemson University to go back home to farm. That's the same case today. Even though there's a $5 million exemption and a 40% rate, it is permanent. Folks can make plans based on that.
Right. And we're talking long-term plans because we hope people aren't going to start dropping off immediately. Something they're looking down the road to do for their families. Of course, Farm Bureau is a membership organization. One of South Carolina Farm Bureau's many member benefits is a no-cost financial or estate planning service. We recently spoke with one of our planners about the challenges family farmers face as they look to the future. Here's Michael O'Kane.
What I do is a member benefit to our members. Part of their membership fee goes to pay my salary. But included in that is the estate planning process, where we sit down with our farm family members and help them, guide them through the process of planning their own estate, helping them select an attorney, whatever the case may be, essentially walking them through the process. Part of my message to our farm families is you may or may not be subject to these exemption amounts. You may not be subject to the estate taxes. But don't make the estate tax be your only reason to plan your estate. There are much bigger reasons to have and to do the estate planning than the taxes that would be due.
As we said earlier in the program, if Congress had not addressed the estate tax issue in early January, about 500,000 farmers, family farmers, would have faced a huge increase at the time of the farm owner's death. The new permanent status of the federal estate tax issue is a big victory for Farm Bureau, but is it enough? We sat down recently with farm father and son, Walter and Brian Dantzler, to pose that question.
You know, the thing about agriculture, it's a business that takes many years to build an estate. And we've been aware of issues with estate taxes for many years, and we don't want to see our hard work be lost in taxes to the government. So we've taken plans, and my father did before me, we've taken plans to assure to the best that we can that our land will still be productive and we'll be able to support the families that own this farm.
We have a lineage and a history and a heritage that, you know, frankly, I would like to see carried on. It's hard to say what a 9-year-old is going to do. He's enthusiastic about everything that we do, so, you know, maybe he would carry on that legacy. I would hope so.
What most people that don't have a real connection to the land don't understand is that we have great feelings for our land, and it's not just a way to make a living, but it's what we do. It's our life, and we do have. It's not just an asset for us. It's our way of life, and we take a lot of pride in keeping this land productive for generations to come.
You have to think about death to be involved in this situation, but it's something that we need to think about. It's going to happen, and we hope that it happens in succession as the way it should. You know, I look forward to being able to farm this land and manage this land. I have a 9-year-old son. I look forward to being able to pass this land down to him and for it to be manageable and equitable and for him to be able to make a living off of this land.
Stay tuned. We'll have more from South Carolina Farm Bureau's installment of Voices of Agriculture in a moment. Hello and welcome back to Voices of Agriculture. I'm Reggie Hall. We're joined today by South Carolina Farm Bureau President David Winkles, who's also a farmer and a member of the American Farm Bureau Board of Directors. We've been talking today about the last-minute effort by Congress to make a federal estate tax law permanent, which is something that Farm Bureau has had as a priority policy for quite a while. Congress kept the exemption amount at just over $5 million, although it raised the tax rate from 35% to 40%. But before we leave our program, I want to talk briefly about another issue of importance to farmers across the country, and that's the Farm Bill, another Farm Bureau priority. In its efforts to address a number of outstanding issues, Congress incorporated a temporary fix to the Farm Bill during its fiscal cliff exercise. Congress granted a 9-month extension to the current Farm Bill. Without that extension, by law, the Farm Bill would have rolled back to a 1949 law, creating havoc for farmers and consumers. Mr. Winkles, let me ask you first, why do we need a farm bill in the United States?
Well, farming is unique. We know about all the difficulties there are out there. We know the challenges of the weather. We know the challenges of international markets. We know the challenges of regulatory burden. Most folks don't really realize all the issues that farmers deal with, but the weather, I think, is one of the keys. Farm bills used to be called Agricultural Stabilization Acts. And what agriculture needs is a strong safety net. That's what a farm bill is supposed to be. And that's why agriculture needs a farm bill, to have a safety net.
So what does the new Congress that was recently installed need to do this session regarding the Farm Bill?
What is being talked about through the Senate and the House in this past fall's negotiations, there's been a safety net based on crop insurance. That's not terribly popular in the South, and especially in the Southeast, because our insurance products are expensive because our weather here is much more variable than it is in the Midwest.
Sure. Possibility of drought and hot sun and all that go into that. I know that as president of the South Carolina Farm Bureau, you teach frequently to our members about the need to connect with consumers. Looks like that lesson was borne out with the Farm Bill being included in this fiscal cliff fix because of the milk price threat. Some people calling it the dairy cliff that we may have fallen off. Consumers are needed in the agricultural lobbying effort, aren't they?
Absolutely, and I always said when the consumers realized, when the news media picked up on the fact that dairy subsidies or that dairy support prices would double, which would more than double the price of milk at the shelf, that we'd have some action on the Farm Bill. And sure enough, it got included in the fiscal cliff, primarily because of that, in my view. I can't tell you how many news stories I saw over the Christmas holidays about what was going to happen because of Congress's inaction on the Farm Bill.
Yeah, and as they crafted the fiscal cliff legislation, worked that extension in, but it only gives us 9 months to continue those lobbying efforts to try to get something through.
It does, and it leaves a lot of open questions as to what's covered, what's not covered. Some disaster legislation was intended to be a part of it. Not sure exactly what that disaster legislation turns out that it will be, or what will it actually cover.
Some conservation programs were left out of the extension.
Absolutely, some conservation programs were left out. A number of items were left out. So in some ways they kicked the can down the road. You know, it will now expire on September the 30th of 2013. The next big debate will be the debt limit, and that comes up within 2 months. So that cuts 2 months off of that 9-month extension. So that leaves 7 months. I firmly believe we won't have very many discussions on Farm Bill until after we finish the debt ceiling discussions.
But come September, if nothing's done, we face this same dairy cliff and other problems that farmers face. At least now, farmers going into the spring planting season can plan adequately for their crops. They just don't know what lies beyond that.
Absolutely. That does give folks something to plan against. Again, a long run. The bankers out there, the folks who provide some of that capital for this highly capital-intensive industry, want to see some permanence of a farm bill and what type of safety net it will provide.
Good point. As we look across the world, which is a shrinking community now, I guess, with technology and communications and other efforts, I know you've traveled the globe, you've talked with World Trade Advisors about agriculture, you've been in those teams in your position with the American Farm Bureau and other organizations. The Farm Bill often is criticized in the United States. Some people use the subsidy word. How do we compare to other countries around the world? Don't they also help provide support to their farmers?
Very much so. In fact, most other countries realize how important food supply is and how important it is to keep farming local and keep farmers in business for the good times and the bad. Agriculture in the United States is subsidized, but much less so than in the European Union. The Japanese are the highest subsidizers in the world.
Well, and we know that farmers are very prideful and they're not lining up with their hand out. I know most farmers far and wide would just as soon be in a business that you could set your prices and go to market and make the profit like other businesses can, but as we've discussed, it's so volatile, they just can't do that.
And you know, many farmers have done just that. You see a rise in things like agritourism, which farmers can then set their price for a ticket to go through a corn maze or for a price for a bucket of strawberries.
Right.
So they've been able to set their price.
Very good point. I hadn't thought about that even in terms of community-supported agriculture, the CSAs that are out there. We've got one here in South Carolina that offered an early bird bonus, 5% off if you got in by a certain date, and they set the price of that bucket of produce that you get every week that they deliver. So very, very good point.
But still the bulk of food comes from large-scale farms.
Yes.
Whether that be tomatoes or green beans or corn for corn flakes or corn syrup or soybeans for soy flour and any number, well, just about every product on the grocery shelf has some soy in it of some degree. So that is the bulk of where the supply of food comes from. So that's why it's necessary to support these 2,500, 10,000 acre farmers because that's where the bulk of the food comes from.
Which, by the way, those farmers too are mostly family owned and operated.
Absolutely. In most cases, I think something like 97% of all farms are family owned and operated. Now there may be 3 families,
Right.
and they may have a corporate structure just because of things like the estate tax
Right.
and how you deal with things like that, but they're still family operations.
Good point. Mr. Winkles, thanks for being with us today and sharing your knowledge about the federal estate tax and the Farm Bill and other farm issues. Good luck to you in the new year, and thanks again for being on our program. Farm Bureau's Voices of Agriculture will continue in a moment. Welcome back to Voices of Agriculture. We've been talking about agricultural issues in Congress. That body came through for farmers as the New Year's ball dropped and the calendar turned to 2013. We told you about Congress making the federal estate tax permanent, and we talked briefly about the 9-month extension of the Farm Bill and what awaits us in the future. If you want to know more about these issues specifically and other issues important to American farmers, log on to FBActInsider.org. Again, that's FB for Farm Bureau, ACT, A-C-T, Insider, all one word, .org. Well, that's all the time we have for South Carolina's installment of Farm Bureau's Voices of Agriculture. Thanks for watching. We'd love to hear from you. Shoot us an email, if you would, to voices@scfb.org. We'd also love for you to be a friend of ours at Facebook on South Carolina Farm Bureau Federation. If you want more about today's program, want to learn more about today's program, or see previous issues of Voices of Agriculture, log on to our website, scfb.org. Click on video in the upper right-hand corner. Until next time, I'm your host, Reggie Hall. Thanks again for watching.